I'm going to give you a stark reminder of what happened after Green Lantern was released and what happened after Superman Returns was released. Pay attention, because this is very, very important in what we're going to talk about with Man of Tomorrow and the future, or the lack thereof of future, for the DCU. After Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds was released, it was a financial flop. It was criticised by some and adored by others. But even though Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds was a flop and it was criticised by many, many people, Warner Brothers, then owned by Time Warner, and who were a very different beast back then, didn't just dismiss a sequel. They didn't dismiss the idea of a sequel. They deliberated for about a year whether they should give Green Lantern a sequel and merely fix the problems that critics and fans pointed out with the first movie. Now, eventually they decided not to give the film a sequel. I was a big fan of them fixing the problems, because there's a lot I like about the first Green Lantern movie, fixing the problems of the first Green Lantern movie and giving it a sequel. But they decided not to do that because of the lack of money, because it was a financial flop. A very similar thing happened with Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. After it was released, there was no hiding place. The film didn't even make $400 million at the global box office. But unlike Green Lantern, it was officially given a sequel and a title: Superman, Man of Steel. Reports even suggested that there was a schedule for Kevin Spacey shooting all his scenes at one time, at one point, so he could return back to the UK and carry on working at the Old Vic Theatre, which I think he owned at the time, or he was financing, whatever that situation was. So there was a plan and a schedule. There was a script. There was an outline for Bryan Singer's Superman, Man of Steel. Brainiac would arrive on Earth. Superman at first would show him around the planet. Things went wrong when Brainiac questions the way Superman conducts himself with humans and Earth. Why aren't you conquering them? Why aren't they scared of you? Why aren't you collecting them? That's when a big war erupts between Brandon Routh's Superman and Brainiac. And ultimately, Brainiac takes on the form of Superman's son, Jason, and Superman kills his son by mistake. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, after the Writers Guild strike, they cancelled Superman, Man of Steel, and announced Zack Snyder's, Christopher Nolan's, and David S. Goya's Man of Steel movie. So, back in the day where there was patience, and actually they looked at fixing problems from first movies and giving movies sequels, or deliberating for a long time before giving movies sequels. That sounds a better way of doing things, by the way. What does this say for Man of Tomorrow and the future of the DCU? Is Man of Tomorrow potentially going to get cancelled? Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I am Mick, your host with the most. Your stars, your girlfriends, wives, and especially your boyfriends and your husbands. A very warm welcome to Monday's edition of the DCEU Daily. DCEU Daily, because the DCEU is back and the DCU is dead. And I'm about to explain that to you a little bit more today. And that's why we spoke about Superman Returns and it being greenlit for a sequel, and the deliberation for Green Lantern getting a sequel for nearly 6 months to a year. I remember there was a question mark over that film getting a sequel for a long time. Now, these days, as soon as a film's released, it's either going to get a sequel or it's not going to get a sequel. They don't spend much time deliberating. I think there's a $600 million rule. If a film makes around $600 million, then it's able to get a sequel. And if it doesn't, then it don't get the sequel, which is crazy to me, right? Because you've got to look at the details surrounding the film. Anyway, Man of Tomorrow shouldn't exist. It shouldn't exist. I can't believe they've blindly given a sequel to James Gunn's Superman when James Gunn's Superman has no excitement for fans. Nobody's talking about it anymore. It's been and gone. So will the green lighting of this movie be reversed? In my opinion, the answer to that is absolutely yes. Or don't be surprised if Man of Tomorrow goes from a cinematic movie to a streaming show. I actually think a Justice Gang streaming show is something that could work more than a movie with the whole lot of them in. Because that's what Man of Tomorrow is. It's Guardians of the Galaxy. The other day when Gunn was talking about Supergirl, he compared it to Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, of course, that's all you're able to do. That's the only story you're able to tell, James. And there lies the problem. The eruption of criticism suddenly for James Gunn is insane just because Peacemaker Season 2 and its finale didn't have any cameos. If you're going to hate Gunn, hate him for being a one-trick pony. If you're going to critique Gunn, critique him for being a one-trick pony, right? Critique him for his creative bankruptcy. Don't critique him because he lied. I get it. He shouldn't have lied about those cameos and Easter eggs. But if cameos and Easter eggs are all you're worried about, you're as much of a problem than James Gunn and modern new Hollywood. Personally, I don't give a shit about cameos and Easter eggs. I'm interested in great, vast storytelling, something that James Gunn isn't able to do. Make no mistake, the DCU and Man of Tomorrow are going to be shelved. And the only reason that they've announced a green light to pretend to potential buyers of Warner Brothers Discovery that everything in the garden is rosy. But no prospective buyer, purchaser of this company is bringing Gunn along with them to their party because they all know the fact that there's no money in James Gunn, Peter Safran, and the DCU. The DCU experiment has failed. And I hear Gunn stans and DCU stans spending their time shitting on Zack Snyder rather than talking about all the problems within the DCU. I've seen loads of videos out there why the DCEU failed. The only reason the DCEU failed is because Zack Snyder was driven off the DCEU. The only reason the DCEU failed is because WB were reactionary and took David Goyer off of a prospective potential Man of Steel 2. Goyer goes, Nolan goes, they go to Snyder. We want Batman in the Superman sequel, right? So we want Batman and Superman to fight. So poor Zack had to make a movie called Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, a title that he and his screenwriter, Chris Terrio, absolutely despised. And the film was critiqued for only having 9 minutes of Superman and Batman fighting. After all, it was called Batman vs. Superman. But it was a Batman vs. Superman movie in the literal sense, not just in the physical fighting sense. And if you don't understand that, you haven't been paying attention. Personally, I love Batman vs. Superman, but Batman should have had his own introduction. Ben Affleck's Batman should have had his own standalone movie, which Ben and Zack were planning within that universe, called The Batman. And we all know the amazing stuff Ben was going to do. He was going to have Deathstroke pretty much go after him and destroy his life, burn his life to the ground. And suddenly, Joe Manganiello is retweeting a post from someone about Deathstroke. Zack Snyder shared another post from a modern day comic book, some comic book art on Deathstroke, which is very similar to the design Affleck was going to use for his Deathstroke. Very, very curious. I think we can say, without saying what's going on, we can say that the DCEU is back. The Snyderverse is back, and the DCU is either dead or Gunn's going to be working on it in his own corner. I have no problem with Gunn continuing his Superman, his Suicide Squad, his Peacemaker in his own little corner, as long as the DCU isn't the cement holding the straw house built by the pigs together. He shouldn't be in charge of Jack. But if he wants to continue what he did within Creature Commandos, Peacemaker, and Superman in his own little corner, that's fine. If Keanu can come back and do a Constantine 2 in another little corner, I'm fine with that. If they're going to make a black Kal-El Superman movie in another corner at DC Studios, I'm also fine with that. I'm a supporter of everyone having a corner. I want to see a Plastic Man movie in another corner. I want to see a vast movie, a Green Lantern Corps movie, about the Guardians, about all of the Lanterns, not just Hal Jordan and John Stewart, but all of them. Not Earth-based, galactic-based. Because the Lantern Corps is Star Wars in the DC universe with so much potential. I want to see Snyder in his corner. I want to see Man of Steel 2 written by David Goyer and Christopher Nolan and directed by Zack Snyder. I want to see Justice League 2 and 3 directed by Zack Snyder and written by Chris Terrio. That's what I want. I want these different creatives to have their different corners. But Mick, you say this every day, it's boring. No, it's not boring. I have to keep on repeating the obvious. What works and doesn't work, right? But yeah, the DCU is cooked, and it's fascinating to see Gunn being cooked all around YouTube by these different people. Some people, it's just right-wing YouTubers, and their nose is put out of joint with what James was doing in Earth X, right? And so it's not even about creativity, because right-wing YouTube aren't about critiquing people for their creative bankruptcy. It's all about politics. It's all about politics and wokeness to them. So that argument really has no merit, because if you make great entertainment, if you employ the best people, if you cast the best people, then you're going to have automatic diversity. Because the world is multicultural. It's cosmopolitan. It's not just about English-speaking white people. So you need to represent the world with how it looks, but with talented people. Eddie Murphy playing Axel Foley. That's great representation, but he deserved to be there. Denzel Washington, a great actor, one of the finest actors we've ever seen. He was one of the best, but automatic diversity. Do you get it? We don't need quotas. But going back to the DCU, you have to be blind, deaf and dumb to understand and not ask the question, where's the DCU Batman? There's no DCU Batman. There's no DCU Batman movie. Where is he? Man of Tomorrow. I don't think you'll ever see that film in cinemas. I genuinely believe that. So that's what I think. When I ask, will Man of Tomorrow be cancelled? I can categorically tell you that it will be, in my opinion. I don't see a future for the DCU. I don't. Because this is an entertainment industry, not an entertainment charity. James Gunn's ego can't be fed because, they don't want to hurt his feelings. He failed. He was never the right man to be in charge of a DC universe. We all know that. It was very underwhelming that we could have had Dan Lin or Bruce Timm or James Wan, one of the great directors. What a job he did on Aquaman, as I keep on saying. What a film that is. I would have preferred James Wan and Dan Lin as co-CEOs of DC Studios. I believe that would have worked. It would have worked better than what we got with Gunn and Safran. Safran's responsible for a bunch of DCEU flops. And Gunn just doesn't have the range to run a DC universe. But as I say, more than happy for him to have his own little corner. That's what he should be doing. He never wanted this. He shouldn't have taken this opportunity because he was never capable of pulling it off.